Hi, folks. I am continuing a series about addressing sort of like the core problem that we're struggling with in the world. This is part of a series, and this is part three of addressing the problem. And just briefly, the initial problem that I have identified is that we have gotten ourselves into a sense of there being us and them, and there being good guys and bad guys. And then we aren't very good at addressing the fact that we also are imperfect and there's not exactly pure good guys and bad guys in this world. And so, the first part of the series, I talked about finding compassion and forgiveness for ourselves and others so that we can connect more fully. In the second video, I broke down different political worldviews and explained how each of those have their shadow and their light. In this one, I'm going to talk about what's more basic and probably easier to sort of wrap our heads around, just the basic polarity that we're dealing with in the world. And what I want to talk about this as being the polarity between the old way of doing things and the new way of doing things. Now, you can think about this a little bit as a conservative and progressive approach. I've recently also heard that described as protector and liberator. Or you can think about it as left and right, though that's a little bit of an oversimplification of like what's happening in left and right politics. So basically, we have an old way of doing things, and we have a new way of doing things. And these things are what's called an interdependent polarity. That means that they're always going to be in tension with each other. They actually co-create each other. They give each other meaning. And there's good things about both the old way of doing things and the new way of doing things. And they also both carry risks and challenges and shadow, especially if we try to take them to the extreme. Part of what that means is that we can't actually choose between one side of the polarity or the other side of the polarity. We can't choose to only do things the old way, or we can't choose to only do things the new way. That is part of what can actually cause a lot of problems. But if we can get the old way and the new way working in balance and interacting with each other or managing them effectively, they actually can be this really amazing tool for effective change and transformation and growth and just improvement. Because the new way really does build off of the old way, and the old way can really lead to stagnation and lack of relevance in a certain way. So here's a way to start thinking about this. When we're in a tension between doing things the old way or a new way, whether that's in our organization or in our country, in our politics, or any kind of given issue, the first thing is to recognize that that tension and basically all conflict is basically an indicator that a system is needing to change, that there's some sort of challenge that is coming up where the status quo isn't quite working. Um, and that tension leads us to some really important questions. If we are changing, what are the things about the way things are that we want to preserve? Um, so we can think about those as the positive aspects of the old way of doing things. What is the stuff that you want to preserve and you want to hold on to? And similarly, you want to start thinking about what is possible in finding a new way of changing. Really recognizing those possibilities and being able to dream into those, because we can't really do anything unless we can dream about it. But even as we're thinking about what's positive about the old way and the new way, it's also worthwhile to acknowledge what is it about the new way or the old way that's not working anymore? What are the places that we really need to change? What are the places that we're stuck or maybe need to sort of improve the way we're doing something? And then it's also worth acknowledging what are the risks of trying out a new way of doing something, and being able to be really honest about what those risks are can be really helpful if you are trying to promote a sort of new way of approaching things, or maybe a progressive cause. Recognizing that those are the risks and being able to be honest about those will make it a lot easier for people to listen to what we're talking about. So another thing that can happen with interdependent polarities, like the old way and the new way, um, is because we seem to be getting stuck in this choice between this or that, we miss out on what is the fundamental underlying question that we're trying to address. And that's really interesting. It's like basically, if there's two approaches to something, well, both of those approaches are trying to achieve something. And so trying to figure out what is a description or what is a question that everyone is actually trying to answer. And just being able to come up with that kind of question or proposition can actually bring any kind of conflict way forward in being able to address a certain issue. And so, in the case, for example, of progressive and conservative politics in the United States, the question might be like, what is the best way for us to organize our country? Or how can we best ensure like a thriving lives for our children and our grandchildren and future generations? Or maybe the questions about, how do we want um, our government to relate to the citizens of the country, or what kind of player do we want to be in the world? Um, and so those are the kinds of questions that maybe can become unifying questions. And so just getting clear about that is a great way to start beginning the management of an interdependent polarity. Um, Another thing is that once you started figuring out what is the goal that we're actually trying to accomplish, whether it's long-term sustainability or thriving or being a positive role or more happiness or more freedom or more liberty, we could think about a lot of those. The next question is, what are the criteria that we can use to measure that? How can we actually know if there's more freedom or more liberty or more prosperity? How can we know if we're more sustainable? And what might be the measurements that we can use to consider some of those kinds of questions? And being able to come with that shared understanding of not only what the goal is, but what is the thing we're trying to accomplish and how we can get there and how we can tell if we're getting there is really helpful. It's also really useful to start identifying collectively how will we know if there's a problem? What are the concerns that each of us have? And by looking at this, you can notice like what are the risks of either side. So you can either be like, what are the risks of like trying to look backwards to figuring out, like what our future looks like, um, identifying what those risks are and being really honest about them can also start indicating as like, okay, well, these are the kinds of things that are going to really point out that we are stagnating. For example, a real risk of just doing things the old way is being irrelevant or being left behind, or no longer being sort of respected as a leader, for example. And then on the other hand, what are the risks of trying the new way? And how will we know if we're doing that? What are the things? And basically, these risks arise from the concerns that each side has about the other. And so, in any kind of conversation, especially between like a politically conservative or politically progressive, or socially conservative or socially progressive or approach, can really be to really understand what is the concerns the other side has and be willing to address those, or identify that we don't want to actually have the risks of either of our side prevailing sort of come forward. And you can identify what would be the indicators of this. Who's going to be in charge of speaking up? What are we going to do if we start falling into the risky extremes of one side or the other? And I just want to just like say that there's a lot of layers that we can go with this. Um, Part of it is about just how do we communicate about our different perspectives, and part of that just really means is being willing to admit to our shadow, and be willing to uplift what's good about the other perspective. And if you, as I've said in other videos, if you aren't clear about what are the positive influences or the positive motivations of someone else's perspective, then, well, you can ask them, or maybe think about it a little bit more. It can be really powerful to actually open that space, maybe even in privacy, to start considering like what's good about the other side. And that is how we're going to move this thing forward. We really do need the best of all the things that got us here, and we also need to continue to be a dynamic, changing, evolving society. And recognizing that these things are always going to go hand in hand will do a lot to help us moving forward. And it'll also help us sort of get out of this like good guy, bad guy dynamic, and and it can really help also in just being able to have compassion for the journey that we're going to continue to be on forever, because that's the real trick about any interdependent polarity, like the old way and the new way, is that honestly, it's going to go on forever. This will always be the question. So, how can we be better in relationship with each other as we are navigating this ongoing back and forth process? Thank you so much for listening to this. I encourage you to check out the other videos in this series. You can find them on YouTube. There's a link over here on the side. And if you're interested more in people talking about transforming politics and democracy, I encourage you to come check out the Fractal Friends podcast, and that's at fractalfriends.us. And you can find there a whole list of episodes about transforming how we relate and change, yeah, the way that we manage this world together. Thank you so much for listening, and there will be about one or maybe two more videos in this series, so please stay tuned and have a great day.